This burden is the burden of the will of God. This burden is the burden of the cross of Jesus. This burden is the burden to do the will of God. It is the burden of the others. The burden of Christians. Burden of the lost. Burden of Christ. That Christ will be established upon them. That's the burden that I want to speak about it. Because the burden is what keeps people going. But if you don't have the burden, you cannot keep on going. The burden is what you need to be a servant of God. The burden is what you need to minister before God, to serve people well. You need the burden. For without the burden, you cannot be a minister. You cannot be a servant. For the burden of the Lord, it consumes you. It gives you sleepless nights. It gives you desperate food until you fulfill the burden. This is for if you don't have the burden, you are not going anywhere. You are not serving God. You cannot serve people because it is burden that helps us to keep on moving. It is burden that moves us. It is burden that makes us to go again. It is the burden of God that helps us to keep on going, that helps us to keep on moving in faith. If you don't have a burden, you cannot keep on moving. Where is the burden of God in you? Where is the burden of Christ in you? Where is the burden of Jesus? Where is the burden of ministry? Where is the burden of people? Where is the burden of the love? Where is the burden of God upon you? The burden of prayers, the burden of intercessors, the burden to serve God, the burden to worship God, the burden to give Him glory. Where is the burden? The burden to pray for others, the burden to reach for others, the burden of your family, the burden of your people, that it is my burden that they may be saved. That is the burden that I'm speaking about. For Christianity without the burden is not Christianity. It is a scam. You cannot follow Jesus unless you have a burden. You cannot be a minister unless you have a burden. You cannot be a worshiper. You cannot be a worker unless you have the burden of Jesus upon you. And if you try to do, or if you try to be, you will not go far, because it is burdens that keeps us moving, that keep on serving God. It is burden that keeps us following Jesus, that God is looking someone who has burden of the Lord. He's looking woman. He's looking a man who has the burden of the Lord, that He may use him, that He may use him for the work that is before us. And when God looks at many people, He sees they don't have the burden. So He's asking, who has the burden of the Lord? Who has the burden of the Lord, that I may use him to go reach other people? And He asked the question, who will go for us? Who will go for us? Who will stand for us? Those that has the burden. Because it is not all people who will go, only those who have the burden. That is how it is. If you don't have the burden, you don't care of righteousness, you don't care of eternity. But somebody who has the burden of the Lord, he is not comfortable. He wants to keep on following Jesus because he has the burden in him.